Back away.
Wait, are we starting?
Yeah.
What's
Who wants to go first?
Do we have a discussion topic, or are we just...
No, remember we each contribute.
Remember we each have our discussion topics that we did lots of research on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wait, is this the last time we had, like, what did the discussion give you?
Well, yeah, but we'll have...
Why doesn't
Okay.
someone just pick... What are all our topics? I'm doing Jews and Dog.
I'm doing Kafka's houses.
I'm doing Woman in Kafka.
History of translation of literature.
I am doing Kafka's publishing during his lifetime.
You want to kick it off?
Sure. So translation is obviously important to this one because it's a translated novel, or translated works. I found a lot of information, interestingly enough, from the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, which points out that literature is one of the only forms of art which is restricted by language barriers, and therefore it's one of the only forms of art that's less accessible to people who don't speak the same language. Yeah, and there's the distinction between wanting to be faithful to the novel, or being faithful to the work of art and giving it kind of a literal translation, or kind of giving it more meaning and translating it in a way that doesn't necessarily mean exactly what it means, but it's, I don't know what I'm
Poetic.
Don't know where I'm going.
Wait, sorry, what's your
Okay,
topic again?
The works and translation.
Works, right? So you're just looking at basically works that have been translated?
No. Translation in general.
Just in general of all literature?
Yeah.
Can I add to that
Yeah,
just really
of
quick? So I found when I was researching Jews in Prague that a lot of German authors who wrote in German were Zionists, like Max Brod. So, and it was actually, like, Jews had a huge cultural impact on these authors, and a lot of them served as intermediaries between the two cultures of, like, German and Jewish culture, and they actually translated a lot of German works to Czech, which I thought was interesting. Nice tie in there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I was getting at there, sorry, I just found the right terms, was an imitation or versus kind of something that's based on the novel. Mm-hmm. That was kind of what I was going for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This really kind of connects to the woman in Kafka.
Does it really? Okay. So this is a very good quote which Kafka said about women. He said, "Women are traps which lie in wait for men everywhere in order to drag them down into the finite." Wow. And I thought that was really good. He sort of believed that women would hold him down. Despite this, his romantic life was quite active. He was a patron of prostitutes and brothels, and he was engaged twice. And had a girlfriend, and then had 2 mistresses, which I thought was very interesting. If you want me to talk about them, I can.
Yeah.
Okay. So mistresses, right? So first we have Milena, who was a Czech journalist, and he had an affair with her during his engagement with Julie Bayer. Julie. I don't have a last name, but Julie. And she was actually married too, and she was much younger, and she was quite a scandalous figure. She did drugs and had other affairs with other people. And this is an interesting quote which he said about her, which really reminded me of how he speaks about women in his stories. He said, "It occurs to me that I can't remember your face in any precise detail, only the way you walk through the tables in the cafe, your figure, your dress. That I still see." I thought that was very interesting. And another woman he had an affair with was Dora Diamant, and they ran off together to live in poverty. And she was the girlfriend / mistress with whom he spent the rest of his life. And he proposed marriage by writing to his father. However, the answer was no. So that was good.
Okay, I can talk a bit about his houses. Doesn't relate, but it's so. He lived in Prague, and for most of his younger years, he lived in the Old Town Square in Prague. He moved about 14 times with his family around the square. So where he was born was next to the Church of St. Nicholas on the Czech names Meslova and Kaprova Street. And the church was described, like, I included an image of it here. It's these spires here, and Yes.
He lived in the church.
He lived, and his house was just below.
Below.
And there was a quote that he described it as he said in the trial he described a cathedral, and it is said that it was inspired by that church. In the trial, he described the cathedral as it bordered on the limits of scale that human beings could bear. So I think it's just interesting how he interpreted that image.
Wait, could you repeat that for 1 second? Sorry.
Yes. The quote was, it bordered on the limits of scale that human beings could bear. Also, jumping around a bit, but after he moved out with his parents and he was having his successful practice in an insurance company, he lived, and we saw in the video, he lived in a building that was destroyed next to the Hotel Intercontinental. And obviously this is the building where he wrote Metamorphosis in the Judgment. And in his diary, he had a view from the window of the toll bridge, and he wrote, "I would stand at the window for long periods and was frequently tempted to amaze the toll collector on the bridge by my plunge." So that's sort of a sad thought. But that is also some reflecting, and as you can see, he did have his character in the Judgment commit suicide.
So he sort of pondered suicide.
It's a
By
seems that
jumping
way.
into the
Yes, it was interesting, like how he said he was going to amaze the toll collector.
It's almost as though he doesn't think of it as suicide, but something to do.
Is it like as a show almost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
It was interesting.
Can I ask a question? Did he
Yeah.
did he live in Prague for all his life?
He did, yes.
Okay.
He lived in the town square for most of it, and then he moved across the river into the castle district, where he lived in a castle at one point, and where he also lived in the apartment building, which was also in the castle district. And another significant house was he lived at number 22 Golden Lane, which is this house here, which we also saw in the video.
Oh, yeah.
And that was actually his sister's Atla's house, but he lived there with her from 1916 to 1917, so it was a short period of time, but he had really happy days there. He wrote his collection of stories, The Country Doctor, there. And next to it was a castle, Prague Castle, which he could see across the river. And that is supposed to have inspired his work, The Castle, which I know nothing about, but yeah.
So I think that sort of ties into his sister, who was a woman. And so he had three of them actually, Vali, Ellie, and Atla, but his favorite was Atla. She was free-spirited and rebellious and was his confidant. He wrote lots of letters to her, and a quote from Kafka about his sister is, "The love to the others notwithstanding, the dearest by far." And what I found was kind of interesting is I saw sort of links between his sister and him and Gregor and his sister in the Metamorphosis. And he actually helped her get an education at agricultural school, which I thought was interesting. And then from 1916 to 1917, like Kier said, she provided her brother with a place for him to write his stories and stay. And it was, like Kier said, like the happiest point of her life.
Yeah, and he seems to have liked her.
Yeah.
Almost.
And this is an interesting quote. He would later compare, so as we know, his father and him didn't get along. He found his father sort of autocratic. And he would later compare his relationship with Atla to a conspiracy against their autocratic father, which I thought was interesting.
Lydia,
Okay,
did you have a...
yes. I researched Kafka's publishing during his lifetime was what Mr. Barry told me to do, but I also went into his death. So basically, he published his books in literary periodicals, which are like newspapers. They don't really have them anymore. It's kind of like, where people publish their writing in newspapers, and they send them out every week. His first one was printed in 1908, and it was the first issue of a magazine called the Hyperion, and it's called a magazine, but it's more of a newspaper kind of thing. And he was 25 when this was published, and in this newspaper, they published a fragment of Description of a Struggle, which was it was the one about the dude who carries his friend, and it was really weird. Okay, and then, I don't know if you guys care, but, it's just, well, these are more insignificant titles. It was called Die Aeroplane in Brescia. Oh, that's the German, my bad. Die means the, actually, so it's the airplane in Brescia, which is someplace in Germany. And this is, he wrote this when he was on a trip in Italy with his friend Broad, known as Max Broad, which is the dude who he left the letter for. You guys know that story?
Yeah.
And so there's two main characters, like, in his publishing. It was Franz Kafka, and he was, like, his publisher and co-editor for most of his life. And then he had his other friend Max Broad, which was his, like, he was his literary secretary kind of dude. And executor, yeah. And Kafka left his work published and unpublished to Max Broad, and you guys know the explicit instructions thing, where it was, dearest Max, my last request, blah, 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 blah. And then Broad ignored that and published them in his, and he finished some of his stories and published a whole other book. Okay, and there was about 4 books published. The first one was Betrachtung, which is the meditations book that we read, and it was 18 stories he wrote between 1904 and 1912. And so he was like 23 to 28 from that time.
4 books published during his life? Or what do you mean published?
Let me, hold on, I have...
Just in general.
There were...
Adding on from that in the meantime, that definitely goes back to the translation, because I found an article pointing out about how translations are often kind of products of accretion, so that means that there's one original version, and then the next person who decides to translate it kind of takes into account that and adds on more, so they change it a little bit, but keeping that, taking that into account. And because most of the people who are going to be translating books, especially Kafka, are going to be Kafka scholars, and they know that they're translating kind of a classic author, so it's almost more intimidating. And there was one example that I found of an entire essay about 3 different translations of one single sentence from one of Kafka's book called The Castle that Kay was just talking about. So it's definitely obvious that there are a lot of different interpretations, and often it's definitely a lot more difficult to read a book to kind of understand the meaning of the author out of their native language, because there are definitely words that aren't translatable literally.
Mm-hmm. It's also because you've got to think about the role of the translator. It's not necessarily to present an accurate representation of the word, but trying to adopt the meaning of the word for the other recipient of that language.
Yeah.
So there are some terms which are sort of, you can't really translate into English. And how would you think, for example, you like classic, so if you had a character that went, oh, whoopsie daisy, how would you translate that into German?
Yeah, we were discussing the difference between an imitation and something that's based on something instead.
Sorry, did you?
Alexia, I was wondering if you researched Dora Diamond. Okay, because she was his last lover, right? That was okay. Because I found out that she secretly kept 20 of his notebooks and his letters, and then the German police took them in 1933, and then people are still looking for those. So
Wow.
links.
Wow.
I would love to hear more about Jewish society.
Would you just give a nice blanket
Just a nice
background?
blanket background.
So basically, Zionism was popular in like 1899 in Prague. And so there was a lot of young professionals and students in Prague who just formed their own Zionist organization and would just publish these works, basically from like 1907 to 1938. And there was like some conflict between like the Czech Jewish nationalists and the Zionists. But one of the main parts of this Jewish culture in Prague was just, again, this huge like body of literary work. And I actually didn't know Max Brod was like a legit like writer. But
right, what I read is that during when he was alive, he was more famous than Kafka.
Yeah.
So
But when
sad.
he died, he just became like Kafka's friend.
exactly,
Yeah.
no, yeah.
That's funny though.
So yeah, during the first decades of the 20th century, German-speaking Jews in Prague produced a large body of internationally acclaimed literature. The most famous of these writers were Franz Kafka, Max Brod, and Franz Werfel. So it was the last generation of writers and intellectuals in Prague before the outbreak of World War II, which of course all the Jews in Prague got sort of annihilated. Yes, which was actually quite difficult because you look at like Jewish history in Prague, and it's all about like the Holocaust and like World War II.
But actually,
But
there's so much
apparently,
in
like
it.
unfortunately, he died before the Holocaust, so we couldn't research that. Not unfortunately, but
One thing which this actually kind of isn't related to Kafka. It's more related to his sister. This is after he died, obviously, but I thought it was just an interesting insight into her character. So Otla died basically when she accompanied a group of children on a voluntary assistant to Auschwitz, which I just thought was really like interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. And about his mother, Julie Kafka, he didn't have a very good relationship with her because she didn't really understand his want to be a writer, and she often took his father's side over his. So he felt sort of abandoned in a sense.
because did they want him to be a lawyer?
Yeah, I remember seeing that she never really saw his writing as anything more than just a pastime.
Yeah.
Whereas he didn't like his job, he viewed that as more important.
Well, I have a connection sort of to Emma's and just talking about the Jewish aspect. Well, I kind of talked about like the main kind of areas that influenced like his larger stories, but there was also, he attended Alt Nu, which is a synagogue, and it's the oldest synagogue in the world, and that was on the border of the Jewish ghetto, and specifically the synagogue, there was a pogrom there in the 1300s, and it was said to be haunted, and there were bloodstains, and Kafka was attended there, and he knew all these stories, which could just be something influential. And additionally, also, he connecting to the ghetto, he once wrote that that in us all, talking about the ghetto, it still lives. The dark corners, the secret alleys, the shuttered windows, the squalid courtyards, the rowdy pubs, the sinister inns. So even though he was sort of separated from it, he still, I think, even just from that
connection,
lucid description, he must have had some connection to it. So that was something else important. And he never lived there, but he was close to it.
I feel like our topics are very spread apart.
They are.
Mm.
It's hard to draw a lot of connections. Obviously, you can see where Kafka's influence from his Jewish heritage and culture came from in his works, right?
I think it's very interesting because if you think about writers, I feel like Kafka especially was influenced a lot by what was going on around him. Like, he was quite emotional. Like, he took what was going on around him. There's a lot of parallels between the characters' lives and his stories. Yeah.
You know a fun fact? There's only 5,000 Jews who live in Prague now.
Really?
Isn't that
Fun
crazy?
fact.
Like, it's so tiny. And it used to be tons of them. But now
Bountiful.
Okay.
Alexia, can I ask you a question? I was wondering if you knew the time, like the year he dated each girl, or like the time periods, maybe.
No, but I can figure that out.
Okay.
So first it was Julie Baer,
Julie Bay.
and they were engaged twice, and he had a correspondence mostly in letters, but they never really met up.
Never in person.
I mean, they met up like once or twice, but they weren't like. But their relationship wasn't. It was more like a correspondence.
It's like online dating of
Yeah.
the 18th century.
Basically that.
But yeah, also, I remember pointing out, I remember the book that we had, you know, the little like stars, the numbers that correspond to the back of the book, pointing out that that the person that the character, what's the name of the guy in The Judgment?
George.
Is that Gregor? No, yeah, George.
Georg.
Yeah,
Georg.
Georg. His fiance in that story had the same initials and was said to. So there's like
Yeah,
a lot of parallels.
And he dedicated that story to her.
Yeah.
They met 1912.
So that was
That's
before
not a
he
Julie
wrote it,
story
right?
to me.
I know. I'd be like, thank you? ?
So she was kind of like the Frida.
Yeah,
The
Frida. That,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
It's like Kahlo?
And so this is kind of like irrelevant. Well, not really, but like it's just a quote what he said about after meeting Felice Bayer. She said Miss FB, and it's interesting that this is in his diary, and he refers to her by her initials. So it's like
It's almost
wait,
like
oh.
it's almost like keeping an
Wait, was her name Julie?
inventory of
Yeah.
all the names rather than actually feeling kind of a personal connection to them.
Yeah.
Wait, was her
So
name
is that-
Julie or
Felice.
Felice? I thought you said it was
Felice.
Julie.
No, Felice,
No, Julie was
then
the mother.
Julie. No, he had a girlfriend called Julie too. Or maybe that was Julia. Hold on.
Wait, because that makes more sense because that
Julie,
that
no.
fits the initials, the
No,
F
he had a girlfriend
Frida
called Julie.
initials.
First it was Felice.
Felice, not
Felice.
Frida.
Oh,
Not Frida. That was in the book.
Felice.
Then it was Julie. Then at the same time that it was Julie, it was Milena. Then after Milena, it was Dora. Yeah.
Wait, how did he refer to her? In
Miss
his journal.
FB.
He said, Miss FB. Then do you want me to read the whole quote?
Uh-huh.
Kill some time. When I arrived at Broad's house on the 13th of August, she was sitting at the table. I was not all curious about who she was, but rather took her for granted at once. Bony, empty face that wore its emptiness openly, bare throat, a blouse thrown on that, looked very domestic in her dress. Although, as it turned out, she by no means was. I alienate myself from her a little by inspecting her so closely. Alienation.
Wait, oh my god.
Broken nose, blonde, somewhat straight, unattractive hair, strong chin. As I was taking my seat, I looked at her closely for the first time. By the time I was seated, I already had an unshakable opinion, which he actually doesn't go on to say, even though it's his diary.
Obviously, he liked her.
Obviously,
It's
he
so
liked
interesting.
her.
He's such like a writer, like describing.
I
it in
know.
so
Yeah,
much
but then,
detail.
I know, I'm like
but
totally.
He describes this so scientifically. He doesn't seem to feel personal.
And it's not
Like,
positively
that,
either.
Yeah.
Like, I was alienated.
He quite specifically points out. It says he has an unshakable opinion, but it's kind of really difficult to tell what that opinion is
Yeah.
from that quote because it's just so factual.
Oh, he had another affair. During the Felice Bayer time, he had an affair with Margaret Bloch.
Ew,
Yeah.
Margaret.
No,
Bloch.
Margaret. Margaret. Brackets, Gret.
Oh! Wait, hold on. That sounds. Is that the sister's name?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait.
Oh.
Wait.
Wait, when did he write Metamorphosis?
I have it here. He wrote it. Let us see. When
Same time as the judge.
in 1912.
Wait.
1912.
No, between 1907 and 1913. I don't know.
So that could have been actually during the time when he was having an affair with this woman.
So
it's
he-
interesting he made Gret the sister as well, though.
And interesting.
Yeah,
'cause-
but it's interesting that he
Well, then you
blends.
can just
He
look,
blends
you can
like
go down
the.
his relationship, maybe. And wasn't there like sexual supposedly tensions between him and his sister?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just
But-
what. So that
connect to
could
it.
point out how
If you-
the character can relate to his sister and to his
Yeah.
lover.
Yeah.
But it's
That's what I mean.
possible that they hadn't met by then. Because this says during the time that Kafka knew Felice Bayer, he had an affair with a friend of
Yeah.
hers.
Maybe Gret is quite a common name.
Yeah, I think it's like
But
they made
still.
character Emma. Do you know what I mean? It's
Uh-huh.
like it's pretty common.
I like that name.
But I just
Thank
think
you.
it's
Emma.
interesting that that's what happened.
Yeah.
And also leading into your Jews, right? Yes. Hold on. There's a quote somewhere. Wait. About Julie, who was his third engagement. Felice Bayer was twice, but Julie, who was the third engagement, he kind of objected to Julie because of her Zionist beliefs. It sort of drove them apart. Quite interesting, yes.
That again goes back to he doesn't feel. I feel like if he had strong feelings about her, that might not have mattered. But he doesn't seem to rely very much on feelings.
Yeah.
He did it basically, like, maybe apart from Felice, but Dora was Jewish. So was,
I mean, he
Julie.
had prostitutes the entire all the while.
He liked
And
that
this was
woman.
before he was famous, though, right? He was just some
Yeah.
commoner.
He was never famous.
He was
until
never famous during his lifetime.
until he was.
That's interesting.
It's like, do you remember that documentary with Will Self? And he was like,
Oh,
and he's like, it's preferable that you don't know Kafka's writings and go to his grave, and now we dance. And I'm like, what are we
Right. That was.
he was like.
He wrote a lot
his
of
best friend
letters
was
to
famous.
women.
That's so interesting.
They were like famous buddies. It
Yeah,
was like
well, except
Kendall
that he,
Jenner and
like-
Kylie Jenner.
Yeah, but he like fed off his fame.
Wait,
But
which
honestly,
It was like
Like
doesn't
Kafka.
tell- It doesn't relate to either of our topics, but like
Kafka was Kylie Jenner.
Milena Janeska, who was his lover, like during the time when he died, wrote he was a few days after his death. She wrote he was the most significant work work of modern German literature, which reflect the irony and prophetic vision of a man condemned to see the world with such blinding clarity that he found it unbearable and went to his death. And I just thought that was really
Yeah.
because I don't know.
Yeah, no.
He was very private too. He wasn't like a fame.
He was very interesting.
I think he was disturbed.
Yeah, I think he had like hidden disturbance.
Yeah.
Hidden,
know
because
what I
you
mean?
see, you
Well,
remember
he
in the
did have a messed up
documentary,
family life.
everyone was like, yeah, he was actually really like, funny guy.
I read something really funny
Mhm.
while I was researching for my woman. It was this like Kafka scholar went and spoke, and he said something like Kafka was too late or something, and a 90-year-old woman approached him afterwards and said, "Excuse me, sir, but you're incorrect. I knew Mr. Kafka in Prague, and he was always punctual." I just thought that was funny. Do you get it?
Wait,
Yeah.
no.
That's so, yeah, it is really
Because,
good. That's
like-
cute. That's cute.
Yeah.
Can you retell?
Okay, so there was this Kafka scholar, and he was speaking to a group of people, and he said Kafka was too late or something like that.
What do you mean too late?
Just in
Just,
whatever.
like, he
it
said it
doesn't-
as a phrase,
Oh,
like
okay.
Kafka was too late for blah blah blah. And like a 90-year-old woman approached him afterwards and said, "Excuse me, sir, but I knew Mr. Kafka in Prague,
That's
and he was never
interesting.
late."
Because how soon after his death was he famous? That she was still alive.
I think she just
She just knew
She
him.
just knew him.
Like actually knew.
Yeah,
him.
like
Yes.
actually knew him.
That's why it's
I-
funny.
That's why it's
Why
funny.
was there already a scholar?
What?
There was already someone studying his
Because
work.
his
No,
books
they were
were published
speaking.
right after
This
he
was
died.
This was after. This is like modern
Current
days.
day.
This is current.
So
day.
she didn't know him.
Yes,
No,
she
she
did.
did.
She's 90. She's
She's
quite
like,
old.
She's an old lady. And
So he's been around long enough that he has scholars.
No,
And
yeah,
that
he
he's-
died in the
Yeah.
1930s.
But I thought it took him a while to become famous.
But she could still.
Yeah, but
Does the timeline fit?
he died
Yes.
in 1924.
And this speech was
1924.
given now. Do you know how Kafka is famous now?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So the
Okay.
speech was given now.
That's why
So
a scholar was
the
talking
woman might
about
have
him.
been 10 years old. or
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
But she knew
22
Kafka.
or whatever.
Isn't that interesting? Yes.
Anyway, my topic doesn't really relate to any of them, but there are some quite interesting things in mine, in that people always think about mechanics of the text which are untranslatable. People are always like, oh, this doesn't quite work because there's no literal translation. But there should be quite a large emphasis placed on mechanics which are translatable and how they're translated, and that a lot of things that are seen as mistakes or mistranslations are sometimes actual logical choices by the translator, and that's actually what they think kind of represents the story the best.
Mhm.
So I thought that was quite
Whereas like a
interesting.
literal translation wouldn't make sense as much. So
Exactly,
it's
even
actually in the
though-
best interest of the story to do
Exactly, even though people might think that, oh, that word isn't exactly what it means. Well, no, but that
It's
might have been
conveying.
a purposeful
Yeah.
choice.
so. Yeah.
And also, a lot of the different influences that can influence a translator, such as we read about how something like religion affected Edwin Muir, who translated most of Kafka's work. He was the first translator of a lot of Kafka's work, and how religion completely skewed the view of that, and that there are a lot of different influences and they can change the meaning of the story a lot, but sometimes that's what they mean to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Really?
Apparently he was 6 foot, like
Whoa.
tall, and 118 pounds.
Holy
Well,
cow,
he
that's
did
not
have
even
tuberculosis.
possible.
Yeah, that is fair. He was kind of dying, but maybe that wasn't taken when he was dying. I just found that online, which means he was really skinny, which I just thought was interesting.
That's like crazy skinny.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, do we think we have
I think we have enough.
concluded?
I think it's half an
He
hour.
was a
That
vegetarian.
I'm just gonna be like in the corner of the video for the whole video, just being
Okay,
like,
bye.
Do we all want to say our topics once more?
Yeah, I'd love to. Mine was publishing, Franz Kafka's publishing during his lifetime.
Mine was Jewish culture in Prague during Kafka's lifetime.
Mine was Kafka's houses.
mine was Kafka and women.
And mine was the history of translations in literature. And so
Yay!
Yay.
Yeah.
Can we all have this